Hello, everybody. Hi, welcome to the fall edition of the Frank Lloyd Wright Lecture Series. I'm Anna Terrace. Tonight, we're welcoming a speaker from St. Louis at Washington University, Chandler Ahrens. He's the chair of the Graduate School of Architecture and an associate professor at Washington University, as well as being the co-founder of AVA architecture firm. As a partner of AVA, he has worked on projects ranging from commercial creative office building renovations, galleries, retail spaces, multifamily housing, individual houses, academic projects, towers, and even data centers. To date, his work has received international, national, and local design awards from the American Institute of Architects, the Chicago Athenaeum New American Architecture Awards, a Chicago Athenaeum Good Green, Architects Newspaper Best of Design Muse Design Award, Architect Light and Architecture Award, and an Architizer A+ finalist. And he's part of the permanent collection at the Fonds Régional d'Art Contemporain in Orleans, France. He is the editor of Instabilities and Potentialities, Notes on the Nature of Knowledge in Digital Architecture. He's a co-curator and editor of the Jin Home Project and co-chair and editor for the exhibition Evolutive Means, Acadia 2010. Prior to AVA, Chandler was a co-founder of OSA, Open Source Architecture, and worked for several large international architecture firms, including 9 years as a senior project designer at Morphosis Architects. He has been a visiting professor at the Confluence Institute for Innovation and Creative Strategies in Lyon, France, and previously taught at Woodbury University in Los Angeles, and he has taught workshops in Mexico, Israel, France, and the USA. Chandler and I have been friends since 1990. So I've had the pleasure of seeing his career blossom into an incredible work of art and an extensive body from his early days to today. And it still continues to amaze me and impress me. So it's very special privilege tonight to be able to welcome such a long-term friend and a really interesting and creative person to the stage. So without any more, Chandler Ahrens.
Thank you, everyone. It's really great to be back in Madison. It's been, I think we calculated at least 7, maybe 10 years since, yeah, something like that, since I was here last. Spent the day kind of touring around and just the kind of architectural wealth that you have here between the Frank Lloyd Wright and a lot of modern works that are kind of recent or under construction. It's really notable coming from St. Louis. We don't have as much construction happening in St. Louis. So you've got a lot happening here. It's really exciting. Um, yeah, so today I wanted to kind of titling it, possible future. I'm just kind of going to use that as a way to kind of get started and have several iterations of kinds of futures to be able to talk about some of my work. Um, uh, um, Jake mentioned that co-founded AVA. This is a recent venture. We just started it last year. Two partners, Constance Vale, Kelly Van Dyke Murphy. Um, we are all professors at WashU and all have various experience in practice in addition to teaching. And so we're trying to balance, teaching and practice. Not an easy balance necessarily, because we all have kind of, full-time jobs with teaching. We're all tenured. And Constance is the chair of the undergrad, and I'm the chair of grad at WashU. So we have that in addition to running our practice. In our practice, we do both kind of more traditional architecture and public art. And so I'll show a little bit of each of that. Jake mentioned I prior to teaching, I worked for 16 years just in practice. The most probably well-known architect that I worked for was Morphosis. They're 9 years. These are all the projects I did there where I was a lead designer. So 20 different projects in 9 years. Some were just competitions and some were built. Um, and, but I want to kind of start by talking a little bit about St. Louis. Um, St. Louis is a fascinating place to live and think about architecture. Um, so 1904 World's Fair was really a seminal moment, right? 1 year after the Chicago World's Fair. A lot of competition, right, between St. Louis and Chicago. St. Louis was almost the same size as Chicago at one point, almost. Um, one kept growing, the other shrunk, and you can probably figure out which one did what. Um, but it was a fascinating moment, right? Because at this World's Fair, whoa, not too fast. So 117 miles of kind of pathways between all the booths. So many inventions were shown at the World's Fair. It was a time when, the turn of the century, new inventions, really kind of world-changing inventions were coming out. And this is the kind of place where you'd see it, right? Things were shown for the first time at these World's Fairs. And so, the architecture of the World's Fair is also super interesting. Most of it temporary. A lot of it was burlap on wood framing with kind of a temporary stucco. There were some permanent buildings which still exist today. St. Louis Art Museum. Um, the lectures were at WashU in the main building, um, and it was kind of a sprawling exhibition. Um, so, some of the inventions, wireless telegraphy, incubators, right? A lot of kind of automotive. There was just a tremendous amount of invention being shown, and there's really a lot of optimism about the future. Maybe fear with technology, but it also kind of feels like some optimism about the future. And so, um, and the architecture was fantastical at times, very kind of classical at other times. This giant, I mean, look at the size of that Ferris wheel. I mean, those were rooms, right, that are being spun around. They're massive. So it was an amazing endeavor. Um, I taught a studio. It's kind of maybe a strange place to start a lecture. But I taught a studio at WashU where I asked the students, find an invention that was shown at the '04 World's Fair and speculate on an alternative future for it, something that did not happen to it, anything other than what actually happened to that technology. And so it became kind of an exercise of fiction where they had to kind of invent a new future for it. And I have to say, it really opened up creativity because there was no limits, really. And this was like the very first exercise in the studio. So I wanted to really kind of open up creative possibilities. And they really kind of ran with it. And so, a typewriter became some sort of machine that would start to display emotions. You could kind of read your emotions. So it was, you know, not a technology that actually exists. That's not the point. It was really about kind of opening up creative possibilities. And that set the tone for the rest of the studio. I'm not really going to present that studio. I just kind of wanted to talk about the power of speculation when we think about things yet to come, right? The potential of future. The bottom project was some sort of lamp that was the student speculated that the Clean Air Act in the 1970s didn't actually happen, and then they had to kind of make these air cleaning towers, right? And they would be deployed in cities to help clean the air. Um, and so it's really about how do we kind of unleash our creative potential. It's really hard when uh, we know what's possible, and it's easy to limit ourselves, especially in architecture. We have so many restrictions, right? Codes, budgets, politics. The larger the projects get, the harder they get in some cases. So, trying to ask what if. That's the nice part about teaching. Students are really kind of open to learning about creativity and just speculating. So then to kind of get back to St. Louis, we know the Mississippi River is the superhighway of the United States. Um, it's the reason St. Louis is there. It's the confluence of the Mississippi and the Missouri just north of the city. And it was a slightly higher point of land. Um, and it grew around industrialization. Um, the city streets, were kind of active. Some amazing ornate buildings were built. Um, arguably the first skyscraper, the Wainwright building, Louis Sullivan, steel frame, and kind of masonry structure. The terracotta is absolutely amazing. Um, so I'd say there's a lot of optimism in St. Louis. St. Louis was well known for brick. The clay, the Missouri red clay was really strong, and there's a huge brick industry there. Um, Cast iron facades were also, this was like a center for cast iron facades. So a lot of production of these cast iron facades came out of St. Louis because you could put them on barges, right, and start to move them around. We still have some amazing examples, not many left, but there are still some really great examples of cast iron facades there. Um, the challenges we face today, population has declined since 1904. um, and with industrialization moving out, we kind of have a feeling of there's being more buildings than people. Not actually the case, but it kind of feels like it. There's a lot of emptiness, a lot of buildings being demolished. It has kind of a Detroit feeling in certain parts of St. Louis. But we also have this amazing building stock, the buildings that are still standing. So this is a Limp Brewery. It's like 31, well, they lost a building recently, but I think it was like 31 buildings. Um, it was predecessor, before Anheuser-Busch built their brewery, and it was larger at the time. They did not make it through Prohibition. The building was bought by a Brown Shoe Company. And so you may or may not have heard this term. St. Louis is known for brews, blues, and shoes, right? And so, Anheuser-Busch, Brown Shoe Company, and blues music. And so it's just funny that, the Brown Shoe Company took over the brewery, right? And they stayed there until the 1980s. And now the series of buildings are mostly empty. I had a studio in there for a little while, super cheap. Like 3 foot thick brick walls. I mean, it's pretty amazing structure, but mostly empty. And so we've got a unique challenge of what do we do with these old buildings? How do you get people to kind of stay in downtown? We also have the problem of population is not really growing, it's not really shrinking, it's just moving outward. So we have expansion really to the west, because you cross the river and you're into Illinois. And so just the population keeps moving out further and just spreading out. So it's very car centric. And so you've got amazing old buildings that there's less people per square mile. So it's a real challenge of how to operate in a city that has really so much architectural wealth of these old buildings. What do you do with them? So there's kind of two approaches that have been taken. If anyone's been to St. Louis, especially if you have kids or grandkids, City Museum is one example. It is I kind of like call it a post-industrial playground. So it's all scavenged parts, mostly of buildings and factories, um, old airplanes that you can see. They just took rebar and made cages. It is literally like a playground. You can crawl around. The bottom image on the left is a 10-story slide. And these were the old shoe slides. And so going from building to building, they'd put the shoes in the boxes and put them down the slide. And so they took these slides and kind of gathered them together and made a 10-story slide. And it's right down the center of this giant building. And so um, that's one approach, right? Reuse in a playful way, in a way that gets kind of people excited about reuse. Um, Another kind of actor in St. Louis, Larry Giles, as buildings were being torn down, he would go and salvage certain components of the building. Didn't try to salvage everything. It was just not possible. He would salvage, you can see he's kind of figures, carved stone, cast iron elements, terracotta, and just saved this stuff for decades. And so uh, it's now called the National Building Arts Center, and it is the largest collection of building components in the country. The Brooklyn Museum had a decent collection of architectural elements. They just donated it all to NBAC, including a one-third full-height Statue of Liberty, which they're installing at the NBAC. It's a pretty fascinating place, but um, Larry died, unfortunately. And there's this whole, they took over an old steel factory. And so they have just crates and crates of element pieces that only Larry knows what's in those crates. And so they've got this volunteer army that is trying to perpetuate this and really kind of grow it into a research museum for architects. It's not an easy process. Um, Architecture museums are not the easiest thing to get people super excited about, right, and raise funds for, right? Architects visit this place all the time. It's absolutely amazing. But they still need to go through a lot of crates to figure out what they even have. Um, but those are kind of two approaches, right? Reuse in playful ways, kind of preserve and memorialize. Both of these are happening in St. Louis, which I think is interesting, right? Because those are the kind of two opposite methods. Um, so that is an introduction to St. Louis. Since I've been in St. Louis, I've been doing some work there. It took a little bit of time to get work going there since I was an outsider, especially I moved from LA. um, so I started working with a client, Kranzberg Arts Foundation. And the red dot is kind of where they're located. And so it's kind of this midtown area. So it's not the historic, the older part, closer to the river, but it's close to Grand Avenue. And Grand Avenue is um, like the one street where all the performing arts is located. So there's a Fox Theater, they have all the kind of national plays that come through. Snowhetta just did a addition to the symphony that literally just opened. But I think there's like over 100 stages all in that area. So it's the performing arts area. And on the west side of Grand Avenue, Emily Pulitzer built the Pulitzer Arts Foundation. Tado Ando designed the building. And Allied Works did the Contemporary Art Museum that's right next to it. And so Emily is really heavily involved in the west side of the street. The Kranzbergs are heavily involved in the east side. And so I started working with the Kranzberg Art Foundation to really look at this one particular neighborhood. It was a neighborhood that 20 years ago, talking to some of the residents there, the police said they wouldn't even patrol. It was kind of a no man's land. Um, and so the Grand Avenue is kind of up to the left, kind of down to the left, St. Louis University, pretty big university. I think they just made R1, Research One University. kind of straight down Harris Stowe State University, a historically black college. Um, and so it's between the performing arts, two universities. It's really an ideal location, and it was highly underdeveloped. And so these are a series of projects that I'm going to go through that I've worked on with them as they're slowly trying to rebuild a neighborhood, building by building, um, in a place that has very low density of people per square mile. And so how do we attract people there? And so building off the performing arts, started out much more music focused, was the way to start. Um, and so when we first started working with them, we were doing just visioning studies, right? Because he needed to start to get some political support for this. And so we just simply started going through, taking Photoshops and just doing a whole lot of Photoshopping. It would have been super easy if there was AI back then. But yeah, and so we needed to be able to provide non-visual people in the government ways to see how this could improve. And so we just did a whole series of visioning. Um, and that helped kind of set the tone for what their ambitions were, right? And it's super ambitious. Um, but the first project was this building called 3333. It's kind of a cultural hub. It was an old car dealership and repair factory on the second floor. They used to make car engines in there even before it was a dealership. And so this is what it looked like. And so you can see there are people riding bikes here. So this is, people did occupy this area, not too much, but it was, kind of a boarded up old factory building. Of course, we see the bones, you see great potential. Um, it had these really great underslung trusses inside, classic type 3 building, three whites brick, all wood structure with the steel tension rods for the trussing. And so, massive process of just clearing it out, um, and starting to tuck point all the brick, all new windows, basically all new systems. It was a shell structure had to be fixed. There was some sagging structure, new roof, elevator, stairs, fire stairs, right? Electricity, plumbing, everything. Um, and so it's really, a labor of love that Kranzberg Art Foundation wanted to take this on. And so this is a 36,000 square foot building. And the idea was to make it a place where you could have multiple different kinds of tenants in it. Um, and so, this is, after it's completed, so you can kind of see the transformation from the outside. From the backside, they have a whole mural initiative of hiring kind of national mural artists to start to develop, kind of this art walk where they bought the alleyway and started to put murals along the alleyway to kind of make these otherwise forgotten and seemingly scary places much more accessible. Um, and so, even the fire stair that we designed ended up getting muraled, right? Little surprises. And just some architectural detailing and just small opportunities for signage and branding. So when we start to look inside the building, there's a lot of different things that are happening in this kind of cultural hub. And I'll just kind of go through one at a time. So even just like the central corridor, we made the corridor like 12 feet wide. So you could actually start to use it as gallery space, right? Kind of informal gallery space. They have various rotating shows. It's actually a decent amount of wall space. Then there was a small gallery kind of buried deeper into the building. They could have artists in residence. This could be a working space for them or a display space. And so they're not only promoting performing arts but visual arts. And trying to really show underrepresented artists here. Um, there's Mike Martin Media. And so they will subsidize certain rents for underserved artists and businesses, and do market rate rents for others to help kind of balance it out to really grow a diverse community in these buildings of creative people. So Mike Martin Media, they have a sound stage in there, kind of podcast booth, editing suites, things like that. Um, Shakespeare Festival STL, they provide free Shakespeare in the park during the summers. Um, and so this is their office space and rehearsal space where we get to see all those beautiful underslung trusses. Sophie's Artist Lounge. This is kind of celebrating mural artists to instead of being just kind of outdoor and ephemeral, to also give them a gallery setting that's also a bar. And so always trying to find creative ways of bringing in people, getting them exposed to art, and as a business, try to figure out how to get this all to operate. And so while the gallery space, the art moves, the chandelier became kind of a central focal point, the one thing that didn't change. And so the bar is kind of in the center of the space. You can walk all the way around it, so it's an island. And so the chandelier kind of became this kind of stalactite hanging in the space. We wanted it to be a little bit ethereal so you could kind of see through it, but still have presence from the outside. So part of the challenge of this neighborhood is kind of signaling people are here, things are happening inside. And so trying to get people's attention from the outside. So the kind of architecture as branding was something that the client wanted, which is always nice for a designer, right? Um, and so Catherine Bernhardt did a really nice piece that is actually permanent, that's located behind. We also fabricated some tables out of skateboards and beer kegs and spray paint cans to kind of go along with the theme. And those were painted by local artists as well. And then there's the kind of gallery part in the back. So it's combining kind of the bar and gallery together. Um, and then I'll touch a little bit on just, but like digital fabrication. And so using parametric software to 3D model, there's essentially two concentric cones that are intersecting. And then we're able to basically through the software develop each piece that would be robotically cut, and through mortise and tenon joints, you can only plug the right one into the right place. And they basically kind of formed a triangle, so they support each other and became structural. And as long as each one was numbered, so as long as the fabricator could count the numbers and put them in the right order, then the form would come together by itself because everything was precisely cut and precisely designed um, using parametric software. So we were looking at a couple different iterations, maybe having an artist, a mural artist paint it at one point, but we ended up just kind of leaving it white, and they used colored lights. You can kind of see the detail of it, of these two cones that are intersecting. It starts to create kind of moire patterns visually, but it's the kind of crossing of the two really was structural to triangulate. Um, uh, Later on, this was a St. Louis fashion fund. They moved out. They said, "Hey, let's make a little bodega." There weren't really any stores in the area for the people they were trying to gather into the area for this cultural hub. And so, tiny, tiny little project where we were looking at thinking about bodegas in New York, right? And just it's about accumulation, just massive quantities of accumulation, right? In New York, it's like every square inch is just full. And so we wanted to explore this idea of accumulation, but you, of course, don't really need that much stuff in a 12-foot tall, really, I mean, the shelves are 12 feet tall, like a 15-foot tall space. Um, and so it's really one giant shelf, right? And then the point of sale is kind of this little window. So the person is kind of occupying the shelf. And we took just a whole bunch of recycling bottles and just painted it all red. So you can kind of think of a Louise Nevelson approach to kind of unifying all the kind of not for sale items, and it kind of gets mixed in with the for sale items, um, just to kind of create that sense of just a massive amount of stuff. Um, and so, yeah, this is somewhere between, an art piece, sure, and architecture. Um, and, clearly we had a little bit of fun with photography. Um, uh, and then to make it a little bit more so, we're thinking about accumulation and kind of this idea of kind of meta. So the model ends up being more accumulation that gets put on the shelf. Um, that doesn't exist there permanently. We just kind of did it for the photography. But we're just kind of playing with like the worlds within worlds, right? Kind of the possible worlds that you can invent. And of course, this was super low budget, right? I mean, this is plywood and red paint, right? Um, and so, it itself kind of gathers its own attention, and people get pretty excited when they walk in because, again, these shelves are 12 feet tall, and the space is probably only 12 feet deep. So when you walk in, you're kind of overwhelmed with red. Um, but we really wanted to get that sense of just kind of overwhelming. Across the street is another really a much smaller building, only about 6,000 square foot building. Um, and it was a little factory building. Um, none of these buildings were in great shape. Again, everything needed to be tuck pointed. And they actually had to, rebuild some of the parapet because it was in such bad shape. Um, but there's a little bit of cast iron columns on the facade. Um, but it had these kind of long span steel beams. Um, Oddly, one of the foundations of this was a steel beam buried underground, so not even stone. You never know what you're going to find in these old buildings when you start to uncover the walls or dig up. But also had a sloping floor. The whole floor was a concrete sloping floor, so that all had to be dug up and repoured. So just a massive amount of work. It was a gallery and studio space for an artist on one side, and then a smaller media company on the other side. So the address kind of became a design opportunity. So we really try to find design opportunities wherever we can. And so, the signage, we needed an address sign, right? And so we might as well, make it quite, sizable, and really help to kind of announce it's here. The interior, we also put in these little skylights, kind of roof monitors facing north, just to get some nice natural light in there. Um, into the gallery space, and there's a recent show that was in there on hip hop. In the back, kind of a studio space, very raw. We left a lot of things really raw, right? And you can see in the last photo, the old plaster, right, above the white walls. We just kind of left as much patina as we could, right? Because there's an amazing history here. We need the white walls just for the gallery, but everything else we sandblasted and kind of cleaned things up, but didn't want to clean it up too much, right? We don't want to erase the history. It's part of the space. And this is the media company side, obviously before they moved all their furniture in. Um, and then, we often will do drawings. This one's kind of explaining that sign piece, which is kind of a subtractive operation where you take the letter or the numbers and just kind of extrude them through and cut away at this solid to create the signage and just a worm's eye view, kind of looking at those light monitors. Um, uh, we've also been involved in uh, projects that were proposed but did not take root. So this is housing. So one of the things that's kind of missing in this direct neighborhood is housing. And so with creative, right, you're starting to get some daytime use. With music and performing venues, you get some nighttime use, but it's not really around the clock. And so with a developer, we were proposing housing in the middle. And so their headquarters is in the building that we just see on the corner on the right. And one of their other buildings is off in the distance. It has a really nice coffee shop in it. Um, and we thought it was a really good idea, but there was a lot of factors against this. Maybe one day we'll be able to do housing. I think it would be pretty valuable. This is a project that just opened 2 weeks ago. Um, these two buildings, um, uh, 1890 buildings, St. Louis University owned these, and they were about to tear them down. They didn't really have a use for what they're going to do with the lot because they have got a gigantic parking lot across the street, a structured parking lot. So they didn't really need parking. They were just going to tear them down. And so Kransberg Art Foundation jumped in and had to move really, really fast to purchase them before the wrecking ball came. Um, and so it's pretty rough shape. It had been abandoned for 10 years. Prior to that, music venues for a long time. Like George Clinton, P-Funk All-Stars had played there at one point. Um, uh, People were talking about in the 90s, they used to have raves in there, and there were holes in the roof and the rain was coming through. Um, it's it's kind of amazing. And so again, we just opened it. On the left side is a restaurant. It's kind of a burger bar, kind of sports bar thing because we're not too far from the soccer stadium. We got a professional soccer team a couple of years ago, and it's super popular. And so trying to build off of that. And the right side is a music venue. So we can get about 400 people in the music venue. We'd originally thought that the right side was a fire station. It always looked like a fire station. People have been calling it like fire. I think it was called a firehouse club for some time, a music venue. So even we call it firehouse today, even though we've discovered it was a market. Um, and so on the left side, it was it was a bar most recently, and it had these great stamped tin ceilings, which were painted flat black. And then there was all this conduit kind of run all over the place to these, terrible ceiling fans. And so it seemed like, that's the piece of the history we really wanted to focus on. Um, and so we took all the conduit off the ceiling and we made sure no conduit would run across the tin ceiling. So we ended up kind of dropping down through, it's kind of like a cable tray almost, just underneath the soffits of the lowered portion, ran all the electricity through there, put linear lights that were kind of scraping across the tin ceiling and painted it a really nice silver. And so you get all the highlights and lowlights off of the stamped tin ceiling. Again, it's just a burger bar, sports bar. And so it's pretty casual. So our main intervention was really just in the ceiling and just trying to keep it clean. Um, where, there's kind of a close-up. And so we're really just trying to have kind of a minimal touch on that, really thinking about infrastructure. On the other side, this is, the former market. Oh, why did it do that? And you can see it had these kind of medieval chandeliers hanging down. But I mean, the trusses in here are absolutely amazing. Kind of wood trusses with a iron tension rod in between them. And so when we walked in, we're like, wow, we just have to not mess up this space. Um, clearly wanted to highlight the trusses. There's whole clear story windows that were completely destroyed. You can see it's really dark up there, but it's a good 25 feet tall in the center of the space. Um, Again, old brick in there. And so we wanted to uh, just kind of honor the old building, keep the patina from the trusses. And so, there was a lot of repair that needed to be done with the roof rafters and the decking. So we ended up just kind of painting all that black so that the trusses would really pop, right? And those were just kind of minimally clean, just so nothing would kind of fall off of them. All the clear story windows ended up being rebuilt. The wood was so rotten, it just could not be salvaged. Um, and this is a photo just during the day. You can see the light that comes through. It's pretty magical, really. We ended up uplighting on the trusses to light the space to really just highlight that. And then the rest of the space is kind of modern intervention. And so this is a physical model that we made. Um, so you can see we ended up just kind of including these white walls. So we wanted to make sure that everything new was very purposefully new, right? We're not trying to make something look old. It was a music venue, so there was a stage whose kind of back was to the arch opening, and so that was easy load in, load out for the bands, which means that you kind of have to come around the stage to enter. So we needed one wall to separate the entrance from the stage. Then on the other side of the stage, we needed a green room. And there's a vestibule in the middle to go between the restaurant, kind of a sound lock vestibule. Then we had a bar, and then there was an existing ADA bathroom on the lower level. And so we see in the built form, the stage on the left, kind of the bar and the vestibule straight in front of us, the bathroom on the right. Kind of standing up on the stage, looking through the sound control booth area, handicap ramp going up to an addition in the back that was probably maybe 1950s. We're not really sure when that addition was made. But again, you can see just cleaned up all the brick, tuck pointed everything, and just the uplights on the trusses to really highlight those. Um, so super low budget, right? Um, then bringing lighting down over the bar, just simple drywall and maple solid wood bar top. Um, just kind of playing with the geometry that was based on where some water pipes were. It was kind of just helping to determine some of the geometry in the space. But really just looking for that contrast between old and new. Yeah, keeps doing that. And so again, bands. So there's a rock band in there. Um, always interesting to kind of see what they bring up on stage in terms of some of their own lighting. Um, but then up in the clear story, we ended up putting these blue lights up in there. And so from outside the building at night, you can kind of see the blue glowing from outside. So you kind of know something's happening in there. And it starts to give, there's a nice contrast between the cool blue up high and then the warm lighting that's uplighting the brick and the trusses. So we get that nice contrast as well. Yeah. And so there's kind of a highlight of the truss. Um, uh, so the Kranzberg Arts Foundation also does a big music festival every year. They shut the streets down. They'll put giant stages out, and they'll have some big national acts that come. Patti LaBelle was just here in September, or in St. Louis in September. 81 years old. Still, it was amazing. Um, and so, just activating the whole neighborhood. And so they're trying on multiple fronts to kind of bring back this neighborhood. This is a tough project, but they're committed to it. And it's really great to be part of it. And especially events like this, when you see so many people coming out, truly kind of activating the streets, even if it's a brief moment. Yeah, there's one of the examples of stage in the middle of the street. So it's pretty well attended. Um, Shifting gears a little bit, I edited a book that was kind of looking at digital architecture 20 years after the inclusion of computers into the design studio. So it was like early 90s. when computers became strong enough and affordable enough to be used in architecture studios. So we're kind of looking at some of the effects of that. And instabilities and potentialities kind of became part of that through computation, the ease of being able to kind of edit and create kind of iterations, especially using kind of parametric software. Um, changes the design process and even the kind of sense of design from being something stable to being something that's constantly in flux. And so this idea of the potential of this design tool became really interesting for us. And I mention that just because clearly, possible futures. I'm really interested in kind of the potential of things. Um, and so this next section is going to be a little bit of a departure from what we just saw. Um, the possibilities of kind of less stable phenomena to help drive design. And so on this, it's really more of a research project, working with the computer science department at WashU, um, developing a system of redirecting daylight into interior spaces using individual mirrors that each have controls, motor controls. And so we developed an algorithm that you could essentially create an image uh, virtually in a space, and these little robots tried to recreate that image because we know where the sun is. That's easy to calculate. And then through the image, it tries to find the 600 plus brightest kind of pixels and recreate those out of a pixel of daylight. And so this is an individual unit. It has two motors, controller board, and a circular mirror. This is kind of an assembly of a typical unit. Um, and again, working with electrical engineers, computer science department, cyber physical systems to create kind of this typical kind of pixel of reflected light. And we made a wall in the south-facing actually Fumihiko Maki building from 1960s when he was on faculty at WashU. Um, and so then you can see kind of the movement of these kind of pixels of light as it's trying to recreate in a super low resolution image. So not very precise, and it's a folded ceiling. It's kind of folded concrete plate ceiling, so it makes it a little more difficult to actually try and create something that's legible as a system. But we see this as an opportunity to use kind of a low amount of electricity, right? Because it's daylight. All you have to do is kind of move the mirrors every so often. It's just 12 volts to run the motors. But you can do it in a very controlled way. And so if you want daylight in a certain area, you could try and concentrate it to kind of reflect off the ceiling or off a wall. This is just a prototype. We're not really trying to make this a product. This is kind of a test, kind of an academic exercise to kind of test it out. Um, but you can see these pixels of light are pretty bright. And we did a whole bunch of measuring the effectiveness of it. Um, this is a public art project at the 21C Museum Hotel, um, which started to look at view as an opportunity of kind of framing views of the city. So there's these four views that we started to frame. And so within this kind of interface between the plaza and the city, there's a series of view tubes that are made out of stainless steel. So it becomes kind of kaleidoscopic as it's framing certain views. Um, so we're really kind of playing with vision. Um, and so showing each of the tubes and how it was calculated to get both the straight view, so you get the unobstructed view down the center of the tube, and then the reflected view. If you look down, you see up. If you look up, you see down, right? Um, but it was fabricated out of a series of metal panels, each one kind of custom fabricated. and a basic steel frame that was hung on. So very much like any metal panel hanging system that you'd use on a normal building. It's just each panel was slightly different. Here's all the different panels laid out before they were brought to the site. And so again, all kind of custom fabricated, kind of very precise. Everything was laser cut steel and bent, mostly bolted together. Really, only the frame was welded. There was a few tack welds on a few parts, but um, so the kind of installation. Um, and this object is kind of sitting on this 10-foot high wall. And so you're already kind of elevated and have a view of the city. So it really becomes kind of an interface. And we called it viewfinder, kind of like the old toy, right? You kind of look through and find different views. So on the still images, I'll kind of focus on these a little bit. There's the terracotta lofts, which, beautiful terracotta facades. And so this one view frames the lobby, right? Because it has a little more activity. There's a lot of people who live there. And so as you see people kind of coming in and out of the lofts, if you look up, you see a plan view of someone standing down below if they're in the right position on the sidewalk below. If you look down, you see the top of the building. And obviously, if you look right, you see left, you look left, you see right. So we're playing with the way that we are used to seeing the city, right? But of course, the way our eyes work, we see the world upside down, right? Our lenses flip the world upside down, and our brain fixes it. And so we're so used to our brain fixing what we think we see. Sometimes you need something to help kind of take you outside of what you normally see to kind of rethink things. There's another view tube that kind of looks deep down the street. Um, uh, Another one that this one there was an old sculpture on the top of the terracotta lofts called the weather ball. It used to change color. The light would change color at night depending on the weather. I think it stopped doing that like decades ago. But the remnant is still up there and it's really fascinating. So I framed a clear view to the weather ball. But then if you look up, you actually see the lobby entrance doors upside down. Um, and so all of this had to be calculated, of course, because when I started the project, there was no plaza there yet, right? And so how do you even calculate the mathematics, right, of knowing where the sculpture is going to be on a plaza that doesn't yet exist to find these points in the city? So it took a lot of just measuring and setting up scaffolding, right, to where the plaza should be, and just hoping that the contractors build it in the right place. But everything was digitally modeled very precisely to understand the reflection angles. And of course, when it actually worked, I was extremely relieved because again, you don't really know, right, until you build it. Part of the challenge of being an architect, right? You're kind of predicting the future that doesn't yet exist. And then there's two tubes kind of intersect each other at a really nice kind of moment. So it becomes extremely kaleidoscopic. Um, so, so we've seen kind of phenomena of kind of light, daylight as pixels, kind of view and vision. This one is a research project about temperature and the way that temperature creates thermal zones. Um, and so this was a kind of a prototype of radiant heating and cooling panels, but I wanted to test it out on a small scale. And this is starting to understand the way that we perceive thermal comfort. So in a warm environment, we feel it from our face first. Let me just back up to, oh, it's a video. And so we feel it on our face first. Sorry, I'll let that. In a warm environment, we feel comfort on our face first, then chest, abdomen, then thigh. In a cool environment, we feel comfort most warmth at our abdomen, then chest, then thigh, and then face. So there's geometry associated with thermal comfort. And so that was really interesting, right? So how can we then make a prototype that begins to explore this geometry of thermal comfort? And so that was what kind of initiated the object itself. then testing through computational fluid dynamics, a series of iterations, making these glass fiber reinforced gypsum panels, um, just trying to create molds that were then had fabric that we were casting into, and then hydronic radiant tubing set into. So this is one of the typical molds. So spraying in the glass fiber reinforced gypsum, um, laying in the tubes. There we go, laying in the tubes to create these typical panels, and then hooking up heating and cooling systems to it to be able to test it out. Um, Again, just a prototype to really start to understand kind of thermal space, right? Can we use these phenomena to think about how we develop space? Um, so again, kind of looking at this is the so we also had to kind of create the warming environment. So we had warm panels and the cool panel at your face, and then kind of cool panels with a warm panel at the abdomen. So we had to kind of create our own environment to then create the counterpoint to it. And this is also, as you can see, a bit of a digital fabrication exercise as well about precision and how do you kind of assemble parts, complex parts that will fit together. Um, yeah, just some shots of that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And these are some of the different iterations and just running through the computational fluid dynamics to begin to understand it. So a lot of it is, like testing, how do you know if it's going to work or not? Those are the different iterations altogether. So then, how can we use some of these instabilities as potentialities, right? How can we use this not just to make these kind of odd academic prototypes, but to develop architecture around it? Um, and so, thinking about kind of light and heat as energy source, this is a very small 400 square foot addition to a house where we developed the roof to maximize solar gain for the photovoltaics. And so it generated the whole geometry to get kind of the optimum angle. Um, and it's a little bit of, yeah, the sun angles made me do it argument. Um, but it kind of created an interesting result, right? Really being rigorous about maximizing the sun. Again, we did solar simulations to kind of verify that we understood it. And then there's the addition with the roof kind of being formed. Um, and the geometry in some ways is a result of the amount of roof area needed for the photovoltaic panels and for them to be rotated in the proper direction. So the chamfer was the roof that we really didn't need because that was extra. Uh, it had to be a shed roof to maximize the number of solar panels, which kind of extended the roof out. So we kind of ended up angling the facade out a little bit. And then to get back to the window, you can see it's kind of carved out a little bit. And so the form and performance start to get tied together. Another shot of the kind of chamfered corner of the roof that we didn't need. And interior window of the kind of play space. And this was just 2 bedrooms and a play space for their kids. So I was starting to understand the light in there. One of the other interesting opportunities that came along with this is we moved the interior stair with this new addition. And the most logical place is to move it into where their library was. So why not make the stair into a shelf? And so the treads are the bookshelves, the risers are the structure of the stair. Um, and so, it gets kind of thinner at a moment and gets a little bit fatter at the end, where it's a switchback stair. So it kind of cuts back up and becomes a little bit more minimal as it fits into the space. Again, using robotic cutting for each of the parts so that it can be assembled accurately and easily. Um, uh, at a very different scale, this was a project for Naver, which is kind of the Google of Korea. And they were building a new data center. And so the initial phases, we took an approach of, how can, data centers, of course, produce massive amount of heat. And so what can we do to take advantage of some of that heat and relieve the heat from the building. And so we were looking at water and trying to create kind of a thermal sink to be able to absorb some of that heat so you can radiate it to the atmosphere. And so we did this initial study. This was a competition before they had even, this was like the first phase. They hadn't even given us a site yet. So once we got the site, it was a very unlikely site. It was kind of a valley of a pretty steep hillside. Like, okay, that's odd. Um, and so because it was this valley, we said, well, you can have all this water runoff into this valley. Let's dam it up and we can make a lake in there. And that could be our thermal heat sink of a lake. And so where that lake kind of formed, kind of determined the outline of the project and plan to where the water would kind of naturally fill up. Um, and then to reduce any solar heat gain, we put a green roof over all of the data center itself. And so this is going to be a self-sustaining building in the sense that people live there. There's dormitories, there's offices, R&D. And so we made these kind of rocks in this garden of the, in a traditional Korean landscape garden, there's usually a pond with strategically placed rocks. And so we kind of made these rocks as the human spaces. And we took all the computer spaces and we can put them under the green roof into the surrounding hillside. Um, and working with Buro Happold, really understanding kind of energy dynamics of, it's again, super intense data centers, just trying to, in any way we can, minimize, right, some of the energy usage by trying to get some passive means and to use that water to both generate the space. And so we built this big model, but because a lot of the data center itself was under the ground, we made this kind of floating cantilever model. So you actually have to crouch down to see the data center itself underneath. And then these are some of the rocks. There's a path that goes around the edge of the water. So you're always in reference to the water. Um, and then the rocks were kind of these glowing elements that would kind of change day to night. And those were the kind of human spaces. So it's interesting to think about designing spaces for computers and humans, but not necessarily, um, uh, they're not always kind of mixing. Um, and the idea that, this is kind of warm water. So it started to kind of develop a steam and have its own atmosphere on it, right? We'd originally proposed that it would be like thermal bath. I think that was a step too far for them. But that was the idea of how do you use that heat, right? If you think of like the Blue Lagoon in Iceland or something, right, as an amazing tourist destination. But I think with their, they're the Google of Korea, and they're like, no way, security, right? Um, but we're really thinking about kind of thermal conditions as a way to drive an architecture. But of course, this is mainly data and computer racks. So, it's fascinating to kind of think about designing spaces for computers. What do computers want? Um, um, and so maybe the last part, and I'll wrap it up, is the last part of future is more kind of predictable future. So as mentioning earlier, I think one of the challenges of what we do as architects is we're proposing a future that doesn't yet exist, but we're saying it's going to exist, and we say it with confidence, right? Because we have to sell that idea. How do we know it's going to work the way you think it's going to work? How's it going to fit together the way you think it's going to fit together? Um, and so, on these kind of smaller scale projects, maybe it's a little bit easier. And I was talking about digital fabrication as a way to talk about it. And so this is a retail store. Um, and you can see the geometry is, there's some complexity in the geometry and trying to keep this reasonably affordable. It's a skincare company. And so the main kind of elements of the design are thinking about creating a series of shelves on either side of the retail space, creating a series of like carve out kind of alcove spaces where you can try the skin creams. These are really expensive, high-end skin creams. And so there's these kind of little testing areas. And then there's other areas where we wanted to display the shelves, but we didn't want shelves like everywhere, right? So it's a real minimalist experience. And so there's kind of the white, the datum of the white horizontal shelves. There's the carve outs of the spaces that get carved into the wall. And when you carve into that white section, then there's these kind of gold objects that are kind of hidden within. So a little bit of kind of mystery in there. This is kind of a drawing model that's getting to explain the components of it. A close-up of one of the shelving areas. And so, every number of layers, we kind of left an element in there, and that becomes the shelving. And so you can begin to see like, each piece, it's all kind of horizontal layers, all computer cut. But we developed this project parametrically. So we develop a really complex model that takes into account all the geometry and can produce all the parts for us that could get robotically cut. And so, given the power of computation, we can look through a lot of different iterations pretty easily once you've invested the time into developing the model. And so this becomes a way of kind of designing a whole family and not necessarily choosing, which child you love the best, but kind of seeing which one seems to kind of work the best for this situation. And you love the entire family, right? But it's hard to pick your favorite child in this sense. Um, as part of the construction documents, we created assembly drawings. So again, each part gets a number engraved into it. There's dowels to align them. So as long as you kind of slip each part over the dowels and you can count, you can put, 1, 2, 3, you can kind of place them in order of kind of gold, white. Then the geometry starts to emerge out of it and is very precise. Um, and so, otherwise, I mean, it would take a lot of craftsmanship to be able to get that level of precision and predictability at a reasonable cost. So using robotics certainly helped in this situation. This is just kind of a drawing where I just pulled out each of the tags of each element that the computer was generating. And so, the larger concept was there. The computer is just there to help me, right? To develop the parts that I could send directly to the fabricator to then just cut the parts. So a little bit different, and there's, all the parts being brought after they're cut, um, prior to being painted before they get brought out onto the job site. Again, the kind of final space, very kind of clean and minimal in the end. You don't really notice kind of the amount of parts that it took once everything goes together. And we did a really project got even smaller on another version. This one's in Texas, where it's these like little kiosks almost. Um, Similar technique, just on the smaller elements, but still the idea, you kind of start with this object, you carve spaces out of it. There's the gold spaces that start to get revealed within, looking at different iterations quickly. And another just kind of design drawing, looking at, each of the tags that the computer assigned to the piece. I mean, I wrote the script to assign them, so it's not random. It's in order, but yeah, and that kind of develops the final piece. So I think, using tools to help us predict the future, whether it's, simulation, digital fabrication, working, directly with fabricators of various sorts, right? These are all tools that help us as architects to be more confident in what we're proposing, that we know uh, can be achieved though with the ease and performance and accuracy that we're really hoping for when we're thinking about it. So I think with that, that was it. Thank you.